You got fat. That was the first thing Jason Miller said to me after 2 years of silence. And somehow it hurt less than the way everyone else at the rooftop bar pretended not to hear him. The October wind whipped across downtown Chicago, cold enough to sting my cheeks, carrying the smell of rain and expensive cologne. I stood there in a navy maternity dress I'd bought on clearance at Target, one hand instinctively resting over the small curve of my stomach, and forced myself to breathe. 28 weeks. That's what the doctor had said that morning. 28 weeks and 5 days. I had memorized every number like it was sacred. Jason took a slow sip of his craft beer, eyes dragging over me with a smirk that hadn't changed since college. Guess life didn't hit you as good as it hit me, he added, gesturing vaguely to his tailored jacket, his polished shoes, the gold watch I knew he'd probably financed. A few of our old classmates shifted uncomfortably. Someone laughed too loudly. I swallowed hard, tasting metal at the back of my throat. I had imagined this moment so many times, running into him, proving I was thriving, unbothered, untouched by the way he'd walked out when things got complicated. Instead, I felt exposed under the string lights, like every pound I'd gained was a public failure instead of the quiet miracle it actually was. I'm doing fine, I said softly, my voice steadier than I felt. He raised an eyebrow. Sure you are. The music thumped behind us, bass vibrating through the wooden deck, and I became hyper-aware of everything. The chill against my bare arms, the way my flats pinched after standing for hours at the clinic, the protective way my palm curved over my belly. He didn't know. None of them did. They saw weight. They saw decline. They didn't see the ultrasound photo folded carefully inside my purse, the tiny profile with a stubborn chin and a heartbeat that had once echoed through a dark exam room like a promise. Jason leaned closer, lowering his voice, but not enough. You could have at least tried to stay in shape. The words landed, sharp and unnecessary. I felt something inside me tremble. Not shame, not anymore, but something fiercer. I thought about the night he told me he wasn't ready for responsibility, that he needed freedom, that I was too much. He had no idea how small those words had made me feel back then. But tonight, standing under a skyline worth millions, I didn't feel small. I felt protective. Of myself. Of the life growing inside me. A shadow shifted at the edge of my vision, tall and still near the entrance of the rooftop lounge. I didn't turn right away, but I felt it. The change in the air, the subtle quiet that rippled through the crowd like a current. Jason was still talking, still performing, unaware that some men command a room without raising their voice. I exhaled slowly, fingertips pressing lightly against my stomach. 28 weeks and 5 days. Let them think whatever they wanted. They were measuring me by inches. They had no idea I was carrying a legacy. Jason was still smiling when he noticed that the conversations around us had thinned into a strange, respectful quiet, like the moment before a storm breaks over Lake Michigan. And for the first time that night, he followed my line of sight toward the entrance. Adrien stood there, as if he had always belonged to that skyline. Charcoal suit tailored within an inch of perfection, dark hair swept back, one hand resting calmly in his pocket, while the other adjusted the cuff of his white shirt with slow precision, and he did not need to raise his voice or move quickly because power did not rush. It waited. My pulse shifted, not from fear but from recognition, from the way the air seemed to steady itself around him. Jason let out a small laugh under his breath, misreading the tension as admiration for him. What? You brought a bodyguard now, he said, glancing over my shoulder, and I felt heat rise up my neck. Not embarrassment, but warning. Adrien's gaze never left me, not even for a second, and when he finally stepped forward, the wooden planks beneath his shoes barely made a sound. He stopped at my side close enough that I could feel warmth through the thin fabric of my dress, and without looking at Jason, he asked quietly, "Are you all right?" His voice was low, controlled, the kind that did not compete with music because it did not need to. I nodded once, though my fingers tightened instinctively over my stomach. Jason straightened, suddenly aware that he was no longer the tallest presence in the circle. "We were just catching up," he said, forcing a grin. Adrien's eyes shifted to him then, calm and unreadable, and in that brief silence I saw Jason's confidence flicker. "Catching up requires mutual respect," Adrien replied evenly. There was no threat in his tone, only fact. The city lights reflected in his eyes like cold fire, and I realized how different the two men were. Jason loud and restless, always performing. Adrien still, deliberate, the kind of man who calculated before he spoke. Jason scoffed. I was giving her some honest feedback. The words sounded smaller now, thinner in the open air. Adrien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and for the first time that evening he looked at my hand resting over my belly. His expression shifted, not softer exactly, but deeper, protective. He stepped half an inch closer, enough that the space between us disappeared, and addressed Jason without raising his voice. You will choose your words more carefully. It was not a command shouted across a room. It was a boundary drawn in ink. Jason laughed again, but it lacked the earlier ease. And why would I do that? The question hung there, foolish and unaware. Adrien glanced down briefly, his hand hovering near mine without touching. A silent question I answered by lacing my fingers with his. Warmth spread through me, steady and grounding. When he spoke again, his tone remained composed. Because you are speaking about the mother of my son. The world did not explode. There was no dramatic gasp, just a quiet, seismic shift that rippled outward. Jason's smile faltered as if someone had removed the script from his hands. Your son? He repeated, voice thinning. I lifted my chin, meeting his eyes without flinching. Yes. The word felt solid in my mouth. Adrien did not elaborate, did not boast. He simply stood there, presence unwavering. And in that stillness Jason began to understand that the narrative he had built about me no longer fit. A few people nearby whispered the name Romano under their breath, not loudly, just enough. Jason's gaze darted between us, calculation replacing mockery. I did not realize, he said, the edge gone from his voice. Adrien inclined his head slightly. Now you do. There was no spectacle, no raised hands, no spectacle of dominance, just clarity. Jason muttered something about getting another drink and stepped back, retreating into the crowd that suddenly seemed less eager to laugh. I exhaled slowly, shoulders dropping as the tension drained from my spine. Adrien turned to me fully then, eyes searching mine. You should not have to endure that, he said quietly. I managed a faint smile. I can handle words. He studied me for a long moment, then glanced down at my stomach again with an intensity that made my throat tighten. You should not have to handle them alone. And in that moment, under the glow of city lights stretching for miles, I realized the difference between being judged and being chosen, between standing alone in humiliation and standing beside someone who saw not inches gained but a future expanding. The wind picked up as we stepped away from the center of the rooftop, carrying with it the distant hum of traffic from Lakeshore Drive and the faint scent of rain that threatened but never fell. And for the first time that night, I felt the weight of every stare sliding off my shoulders instead of pressing into them. Adrien guided me toward a quieter corner near the glass railing overlooking the city, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back without possessiveness, just steady reassurance. And I realized my breathing had finally returned to normal. Below us, headlights traced slow lines through the streets, red and white threading through Chicago like veins. You should not have come alone, he said softly. Not as a reprimand, but as a statement of concern. I let out a small breath that almost turned into a laugh. It was a class reunion, not a battlefield, I replied, though my voice still carried the tremor of everything that had almost unraveled. His eyes searched my face, assessing, always assessing. Humiliation can wound deeper than most things, he said. I studied him then, the way the city lights sharpened his profile, the faint crease between his brows when he was thinking. I am not fragile, I told him. I know, he answered immediately. But you are carrying something that matters more than pride. His gaze drifted again to my stomach, and this time he did not hesitate. His palm rested there gently, reverently, as if the life beneath my ribs could already understand intention. Warmth spread through me, not just physical but emotional, a reminder that I was not standing here alone out of coincidence. I thought back to the doctor's office earlier that morning, the cool gel on my skin, the rapid flutter of a heartbeat echoing through the dim room like a small engine fighting to be heard. I had watched Adrien's face when he heard it, the way his composure had cracked just enough to reveal awe. Now that same awe flickered beneath his controlled exterior. Jason will talk, I said quietly, glancing over my shoulder at the crowd where he had disappeared. Let him. Adrien replied. There was no edge to his voice, only certainty. People speak when they are unsure of their place. I crossed my arms loosely, though one hand never left my belly. And what is his place? I asked. Adrien's expression did not change. Far from you. The simplicity of it made my throat tighten. For so long I had measured my worth through other people's approval, through whether I was chosen or left behind. And yet standing beside him, I felt something shift inside me. Not dependence, not rescue, but alignment. He did not hover. He did not command. He simply remained. The music behind us swelled again, conversation gradually returning to its previous volume, but it felt distant now, irrelevant. I do not want anyone losing jobs or reputations. Because of me, I said after a moment. The words careful. Adrien looked down at me with a hint of something almost like amusement. Respect is not destruction, he said. It is correction. His thumb brushed lightly over the fabric of my dress where his hand still rested, protective but restrained. No one is punished for ignorance, he added. They are educated. I searched his eyes for any sign of anger, any flash of retaliation, but found none. Only calculation and something softer when he looked at me. I can handle my past, I said quietly. I am not asking you to erase it. He nodded once. I am asking to stand in your present. The words settled into me deeper than I expected. Below us, a train rumbled across the tracks, its sound rising faintly through the night air. I leaned slightly into him, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to. His presence felt like a wall that did not trap but shield. After a long silence, I looked up at him. You did not have to announce it like that, I said. You could have let him think whatever he wanted. Adrien's gaze sharpened just slightly. I will never let anyone reduce you to a rumor, he replied. And I will never let our son be spoken about with disrespect. The word "our" lingered between us, steady and unshakable. I felt the baby shift faintly, a small movement that made me inhale sharply. Adrien's expression changed instantly, concern replacing composure. Are you all right? He asked. I nodded, smiling through unexpected tears. He is just reminding us he is here. Adrien exhaled slowly, his forehead lowering until it nearly touched mine. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just intimate in the quietest way. Then let them watch, he murmured. Let them whisper. I followed his gaze back toward the skyline, toward the millions of windows glowing against the dark. For the first time since Jason's words had sliced through the air, I felt taller, not because someone defended me, but because someone chose to stand beside me without hesitation, and in that choice I understood something simple and undeniable. I was no longer defined by who walked away, but by who remained. We did not stay much longer after that. The rooftop felt smaller now, not because of the crowd, but because something had shifted permanently. And when Adrien offered his arm, I slipped my hand through it without hesitation. The elevator ride down was quiet except for the faint instrumental music playing through hidden speakers and the soft hum of machinery lowering us floor by floor. My reflection in the mirrored wall caught my eye. The curve of my stomach undeniable beneath the navy fabric, my expression calmer than it had been an hour ago. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Outside, the air was colder, sharp against my lungs, and the city stretched wide and restless under the glow of streetlights. Adrien's car waited at the curb, sleek and understated, and when the driver stepped out to open the rear door, Adrien gave a subtle shake of his head. I will drive, he said evenly. There was something grounding about that, something intentional. Once inside, the leather seats, cool against my skin, the door closed with a soft, solid sound that felt like insulation from the outside world. As we pulled into traffic, the skyline receded in the rearview mirror, glass towers shrinking into distant silhouettes. For a few minutes neither of us spoke. I watched the red taillights ahead blur slightly as moisture gathered in my eyes, not from sadness but from release. You were not supposed to hear it like that, I said finally, staring out at the passing storefronts. Adrien kept his gaze on the road, hands steady on the steering wheel. Hear what? He asked calmly. That I was enough once, and then I was not, I replied. The confession surprised even me. He exhaled slowly. Anyone who measures worth by appearance will always come up short, he said. I let the words settle. Traffic slowed near a red light. and the glow bathed the inside of the car in muted crimson. He glanced at me briefly, his expression thoughtful. When I saw you standing there, he continued, I did not see someone diminished. I saw someone carrying my future with dignity. My throat tightened again. It was not flattery. It was conviction. You cannot shield me from every careless word, I said quietly. I do not intend to, he answered, but I will stand where I am meant to stand. The light turned green, and we moved forward. The city outside shifted from bright downtown blocks to quieter residential streets lined with brownstones and leafless trees. I rested my hand on my stomach again, feeling the steady presence beneath my palm. He moved earlier, I said softly. Adrien's jaw relaxed, something almost like a smile touching the corner of his mouth. He already has strong timing, he replied. I laughed under my breath. The sound unfamiliar but welcome. We reached my building within 15 minutes, a modest 3-story brick structure with a narrow front stoop and a flickering porch light that had needed fixing for months. Adrien parked along the curb and turned off the engine. Silence settled around us. Thicker now, more intimate. He turned slightly in his seat, facing me fully. You do not have to prove resilience every time someone tests it, he said. I looked down at my hands, then back at him. It is habit, I admitted. I learned early that standing alone meant surviving. He studied me for a long moment. Standing alone is not the same as being strong, he said gently. Sometimes strength is allowing someone to remain. The words wrapped around me in a way that felt unfamiliar but not unwelcome. Outside, a car drove past slowly, tires hissing against damp pavement. I reached for the door handle, then paused. Jason will replay tonight in his head, I said. He will wonder what he missed. Adrien's gaze did not waver. Let him, he replied. Some men only recognize value after it no longer seeks their approval. I stepped out of the car carefully, the night air cooler than before, and he came around to my side without being asked. When I looked up at him beneath the weak glow of the porch light, I did not feel judged or compared. I felt seen. His hand hovered briefly at my waist before he spoke again, voice low and certain. You are not defined by who underestimated you, he said. You are defined by what you are building. And as I climbed the narrow steps toward my apartment, I realized that for the first time in years, the weight I carried did not feel like shame. It felt like promise. I did not expect the knock on my door the next morning, soft but deliberate, the kind that does not belong to a delivery driver or a neighbor asking for sugar. I had barely slept, the events of the rooftop replaying behind my eyelids in fragments of light and shadow, and when I shuffled across my small living room in oversized sweatpants and a loose sweater, my hand instinctively resting beneath my ribs, I felt an unfamiliar steadiness instead of dread. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in a tailored gray coat holding a large white box tied with a navy ribbon, and behind her stood a man in a dark suit who kept his posture straight, but his gaze respectfully lowered. When I opened the door, the woman offered a polite smile. Good morning, Miss Carter, she said gently. This is for you. The box was heavier than it looked, and when I carried it inside and placed it on my kitchen table, my heart beat faster with curiosity rather than fear. Inside, nestled in soft tissue paper, was a prenatal care basket unlike anything I had seen in a store. Organic teas labeled for each trimester, a plush blanket embroidered with a subtle silver crest, a leather-bound journal with my initials pressed into the cover, and beneath it a handwritten card in Adrien's unmistakable script. I traced the ink with my finger before reading it slowly. Strength does not need to shout. Rest today. I will handle the noise. I exhaled, a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun filtering through my blinds. I had never been given care without expectation before. It felt almost disorienting. My phone buzzed against the counter, and for a second my stomach tightened, expecting another message from someone who had witnessed last night. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. Good morning. Have you eaten? There was no signature, but I did not need one. I smiled despite myself and typed back, not yet. 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then eat. The doctor said iron levels matter. I laughed softly, shaking my head at the memory of him listening intently to every medical detail yesterday morning. As I made toast and scrambled eggs, the ordinary sounds of my apartment felt different, less heavy. Yet beneath the calm there was a ripple. Around 10:30, my phone buzzed again, this time with a name I had not expected to see so soon. Jason. My chest tightened briefly, but not with the old panic. Curiosity replaced it. I let it ring once before answering. Hello. I kept my voice neutral. There was a pause on the other end, then a strained exhale. Emily, he said, no mockery in his tone now. I wanted to apologize. The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him. I leaned against the kitchen counter, fingers lightly circling the rim of my mug. For what? I asked quietly. Another pause. For last night. I did not know. I should not have said what I said. I studied the ceiling as if the cracks in the paint could reveal truth. You should not have said it regardless, I replied. He swallowed audibly. I know. There was no anger in me, only clarity. Take care of yourself, Jason, I said gently. That is all you need to do. When I ended the call, I realized my hands were steady. No trembling, no aftershock. Just a quiet understanding that some chapters close not with confrontation, but with composure. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. Adrien. Everything all right? He asked without preamble. I glanced at the unopened journal on my table, at the sunlight warming the wooden floor, at the life growing beneath my palm. Yes, I answered honestly. It is. There was a brief silence. Then his voice softened. Good. I did not tell him about the apology. I did not need to. Whatever conversation had happened on his end of the world had not been loud or public, but it had been effective, not destructive, not cruel, simply corrective. I understood then that power did not always arrive with spectacle. Sometimes it arrived with boundaries quietly reinforced. I walked to the window, looking out at the modest street below. Neighbors carrying groceries, a dog barking in the distance. My reflection caught in the glass again, and for the first time I did not see weight or judgment or comparison. I saw a woman standing upright in her own life. I pressed my hand to my stomach, feeling the faintest flutter as if in agreement. We are fine, I whispered softly, and this time I believed it. 3 days after the apology, the city felt quieter, as if the noise that once followed me had lost interest, and I began to notice the small shifts that come when perception changes. At the clinic where I worked, patients greeted me with the same warmth as always, but there was something different in the way I carried myself, a steadiness that did not ask for validation. I moved slower now, mindful of the extra weight that no longer felt like something to hide. That afternoon, as I organized files behind the reception desk, my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder for my next prenatal appointment. 29 weeks tomorrow. The number felt significant. I texted Adrien without thinking, appointment at 4. The reply came within seconds, as it always did. I will be there. There was no question mark, no assumption, just certainty. At 3:30 a black sedan waited outside my building again, understated and quiet, and when I slid into the passenger seat Adrien reached over not to control, but to steady, his hand briefly covering mine. How are you feeling? He asked, eyes scanning my face like he was searching for something only he could detect. Strong. I answered honestly. He nodded once, satisfied. The doctor's office smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, soft instrumental music playing from hidden speakers, and as we sat in the waiting room I noticed how people glanced at him, then at me, curiosity flickering, but never crossing into disrespect. Adrien did not appear impatient. He simply sat upright, composed, one hand resting protectively over mine. When the nurse called my name, he stood immediately. Inside the exam room, the overhead lights were dimmed, and I lay back against the paper-lined table while the technician prepared the monitor. The familiar coolness of gel met my skin, and moments later the rapid rhythmic sound filled the room again, steady and alive. Adrien's posture shifted. He leaned forward, slightly, eyes fixed on the screen. The technician smiled softly. Strong heartbeat, she said. I watched his reflection in the darkened monitor, the controlled exterior giving way to something unguarded. When the baby kicked against the probe, I laughed quietly, and Adrien's hand tightened gently around mine. He has your stubborn timing, I teased. He exhaled, a rare smile appearing fully this time. He has your resilience, he replied. After the appointment, we stepped back into the late afternoon sunlight, the city busy but ordinary around us. As we walked toward the car, A familiar voice called my name from across the sidewalk. I turned to see one of my former classmates from the rooftop gathering, her expression tentative. "Emily," she said softly. "I wanted to say I am sorry for not speaking up that night." The sincerity in her eyes caught me off guard. I shook my head gently. "You do not owe me that," I replied. She hesitated, glancing briefly at Adrien before looking back at me. "He made it clear," she added quietly. "I did not ask how. I did not need to." Whatever conversations had taken place were not dramatic or loud, but they had been effective. Respect had been recalibrated. As she walked away, Adrien opened the car door for me, his movements precise but unshowy. Once inside, I turned to him. "You did not have to fix anything," I said softly. He closed the door and walked around to his side before answering. When he settled behind the wheel, he looked at me steadily. "I did not fix you," he said. "I corrected the environment." The distinction settled deep within me. It was not about revenge or spectacle. It was about alignment, about making sure the space around me reflected the truth of who I was becoming. As we drove through the city, past storefronts and busy intersections, I felt the baby move again. A gentle reminder beneath my ribs. I rested my hand there and met Adrien's gaze. "We are building something steady," I said. He nodded once, firm and certain. "Yes," he replied quietly, "and steady things last." By the time I reached 30 weeks, the city no longer felt like something I had to survive. It felt like something I was walking through on purpose. Autumn had settled fully over Chicago, leaves collecting along the sidewalks in shades of rust and gold, the air crisp enough to make every breath feel sharp and clean. Adrien insisted on walking with me that Saturday morning to the small farmer's market 3 blocks from my apartment. Even though I told him I could manage on my own, he did not argue. He simply showed up, hands in the pockets of a dark wool coat, matching his pace to mine without comment. The vendors greeted me by name, offering samples of apples and fresh bread, and I caught the way their eyes flicked briefly toward him before returning to me with polite warmth. There was curiosity, yes, but not judgment. Not anymore. I realized then how subtle influence could be. It did not need to intimidate. It simply reshaped the atmosphere. As we paused near a stand selling late seasoned pumpkins, I felt a stronger movement beneath my ribs, enough to make me stop mid-step. I inhaled sharply. Adrien's attention sharpened instantly. "What is it?" he asked, voice low but controlled. I took his hand and pressed it gently against the side of my stomach. For a second there was nothing. Then a firm kick met his palm. His expression changed in a way I had never seen before. Not dominance, not calculation. Wonder, pure and unfiltered. He exhaled slowly, as if grounding himself in the reality of it. "He is already impatient," he murmured. I laughed softly. "He gets that from you." Adrien shook his head once, a faint smile appearing. "No," he said quietly. "He gets strength from you." The simplicity of the statement settled deep. We continued walking, slower now, his hand remaining lightly at my waist as if the connection anchored him. Later that afternoon, as we sat in my small living room surrounded by grocery bags and the soft hum of my radiator, Adrien studied the modest space with thoughtful silence. He did not criticize the peeling paint or the uneven floorboards. Instead, he asked practical questions. Is the heating reliable? Does the landlord respond quickly? There was no disdain in his tone, only evaluation. I realized he was not measuring the apartment against his world. He was measuring it against what I deserved. "It is enough," I said gently. He looked at me for a long moment. "Enough for now," he corrected quietly. The distinction was not about wealth. It was about intention. My phone buzzed again that evening. But this time it was not Jason or anyone from the past. It was a message from the clinic's director offering me a leadership opportunity in the upcoming year, something that had previously felt out of reach. I read it twice before showing Adrien. "You see," he said simply, "respect recalibrates outcomes." I leaned back against the couch, absorbing the shift in my life that felt less like luck and more like alignment. Outside, the sky deepened into indigo, streetlights flickering on one by one. Adrien rose to leave around 9, as he always did, never overstaying, never imposing. At the door he paused, his hand resting briefly against my cheek, gentle and deliberate. "You are not carrying weight," he said softly. You are carrying legacy. The word echoed long after he stepped into the cool night air. I closed the door slowly and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet of my apartment. The old shame no longer had space here. In its place was something steadier, not loud, not dramatic, just certain. I moved toward the window and looked out at the dim street below, pressing my palm over the life growing within me. For the first time in years, I understood that being underestimated had not weakened me. It had prepared me. And now, surrounded by calm instead of chaos, I felt the future stretching ahead not as something to fear, but as something already claimed. By the time the first snow threatened the edges of November, I had reached 32 weeks, and the world felt slower in a way that no longer frightened me. The mornings came with pale light filtering through my blinds, the radiator humming steadily, and a quiet rhythm had settled into my life that felt intentional rather than accidental. Adrien had begun stopping by every evening after work, never announcing himself loudly, never demanding attention, just arriving with the calm certainty of someone who understood his place. That Tuesday, he found me sitting on the living room floor surrounded by baby books and fabric samples, my back propped against the couch, a small notebook open in my lap. You are building a strategy, he observed, removing his coat and setting it carefully over the back of a chair. I smiled faintly. I am building a nursery corner, I corrected. The corner of my apartment near the window had slowly transformed over the past week, a crib. Assembled with meticulous care, a soft gray rug laid across the worn hardwood floor, a small shelf waiting for books that had not yet been bought. It was modest, but it was mine. Adrien walked over and studied the space without comment, his expression thoughtful rather than critical. You do not have to do this alone, he said quietly. I knew what he meant. He had offered more than once to move me into a larger place, somewhere with security and more square footage and views of the lake. I had not refused out of pride. I had simply needed time. I know, I answered gently, but I need to feel this part too. He nodded once, accepting the boundary without resistance. That was something I had learned about him. He could command a room, but he did not command me. Later that evening, as we sat side by side on the couch reviewing potential names written in my careful handwriting, my phone buzzed again with a message from an unknown number. For a moment my stomach tightened with old reflex, but when I opened it, it was a photo sent from one of my former classmates. It showed a group of them at another gathering, smiling under warm lights, and beneath it a simple message, "We are proud of you." I stared at the screen longer than necessary, not because I needed their approval, but because I recognized the shift. I handed the phone to Adrien. He scanned it briefly, then returned it without expression. Respect follows consistency, he said calmly. I leaned back, resting my head lightly against his shoulder. You keep saying that, I murmured. He glanced down at me, his tone softening. Because it is true. The baby moved then, a strong, rolling motion that made me inhale sharply. Adrien's hand immediately covered my stomach, protective and awed. All at once, he is making his presence known, he said quietly. I closed my eyes, focusing on the steady rhythm beneath my palm. He already has, I replied. Outside, snow began to fall lightly, dusting the street in a thin white layer that softened the edges of everything. The world beyond my window seemed quieter, almost suspended. There will always be noise, Adrien said after a moment, his voice low and measured. Opinions, projections, assumptions. I opened my eyes and looked at him. And I asked. His gaze held mine steadily. And none of it defines what we are building. The word "we" no longer startled me. It felt earned. I studied his face in the dim lamplight, the sharp lines softened by something deeper than power. Devotion, perhaps. Not dramatic, not loud, just constant. I realized then that the greatest shift had not been Jason's apology or the recalibrated respect of former classmates. It had been internal, the absence of shame where it once lived, the quiet certainty replacing doubt. I rose carefully from the couch and walked toward the nursery corner, adjusting the small blanket folded neatly inside the crib. Adrien stood behind me, not crowding, not instructing, just present. I placed my hand over my stomach once more, feeling the steady strength within. The world had tried to measure me in inches and opinions, but standing there, surrounded by simplicity and quiet, I understood something unshakable. I was not the version of myself someone once dismissed. I was the woman building a future that no careless comment could undo. The first contraction came just after midnight, subtle enough that I almost mistook it for the familiar tightening I had grown used to over the past few weeks. But this one did not fade the same way. It lingered, a firm band of pressure that made me pause halfway between the kitchen and the living room. Outside, snow drifted steadily past the streetlight, coating the quiet Chicago block in white, and the world felt hushed as if it knew something was about to change. I inhaled slowly, counting the seconds the way the nurse had taught me, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, until the sensation eased. 37 weeks, close enough to real. I reached for my phone with steady fingers and typed a single message. I think it is time. Adrien called immediately. He did not waste words. I am on my way. There was no panic in his tone, only precision. Within 15 minutes, headlights washed across my ceiling as his car pulled up outside. He was at my door moments later, coat dusted with snow, eyes scanning me quickly but calmly. How far apart? He asked. 8 minutes. I replied. Another contraction tightened through me, stronger now, and I gripped the back of the couch until it passed. His hand was at my waist instantly, steady and warm. We will move between them, he said quietly. The drive to the hospital felt suspended in time. Snow muffled the usual city noise, traffic light and manageable, the heater humming softly as I focused on my breathing. Adrien's hands remained firm on the steering wheel, posture upright, his gaze occasionally flicking toward me to measure what I did not say out loud. When we reached the hospital entrance, staff were already waiting, as if the path had been cleared in advance. But nothing about it felt chaotic. It felt prepared, hours blurred into a rhythm of breath and focus, of measured instructions and quiet encouragement. Adrien never left my side. He did not dominate the room or issue commands. He simply remained, his hand in mine, his voice low and steady whenever my resolve wavered. You are stronger than this moment, he whispered once, forehead resting lightly against mine between contractions. The pain was real, sharp and consuming, but beneath it there was something greater, purpose. When the final wave came, I gathered every ounce of strength I had carried through months of judgment and recalibration and uncertainty, and I pushed not just for myself but for the life that had already reshaped me. And then, suddenly, there was a sound that cut through everything. A cry, sharp and undeniable. The room shifted. The tension dissolved into something luminous. I fell back against the pillows, tears blurring my vision as the nurse placed a small, warm weight against my chest. He was smaller than I imagined, yet impossibly powerful in presence, his tiny fingers curling instinctively. Adrien stood motionless for a second, as if absorbing the gravity of it, and then he leaned closer, eyes bright with something I had never seen before, reverence. He brushed a careful hand over our son's head, voice barely above a whisper. Welcome, he said softly. I looked up at him. Exhaustion and awe mingling inside me. He is here, I breathed. Adrien met my gaze, and for the first time since that night on the rooftop, there was no shadow of correction or recalibration or measured power. There was only gratitude. Outside the hospital window, snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in quiet renewal. I understood then that the journey had never been about proving anyone wrong. It had been about stepping fully into who I was meant to become. I had been measured by strangers and dismissed by someone who once thought he defined my worth. But none of that reached this room. Here, in the soft glow of early morning light and the steady beeping of monitors, there was no mockery, no comparison, only legacy breathing against my heart. Adrien pressed his forehead gently to mine and murmured, "No one will ever reduce you again." And holding our son close, I realized he was right, not because the world had changed overnight, but because I had. I was no longer the woman absorbing careless words under string lights. I was the mother of a child whose future stretched far beyond the limits of anyone's imagination, and that was a truth no one could ever take from me.